Today I'm going to be looking at an expression that replaced one of my favourite bottles of all time. This is Bruichladdich Classic Laddie. Welcome back, Dram fans, my Dram fam. Today I'm going to be looking at an Islay whiskey. If I can just find the bottle that we're going to be looking at today. Where's it gone? Oh, there it is. It was a little bit hard to see. This is Bruichladdich the Classic Laddie, so this is their entry level and in a way flagship product. This is kind of the face of the company, and whether they mean to or not, I always think that this one is kind of them, their like mission statement as to what they want their whiskey to be and how they want to be viewed. And I think a large part of that is the fact that they call this the Classic Laddie. It's kind of like saying this is what we do. So the first thing that you realise, that you notice on this one, is that it's in this rather fetching and unique, very opaque, what do we call this colour? Aquamarine? I'm going to go with aquamarine bottle, and I think it's kind of sprayed or powder coated, not sure. It is actually clear glass, but it's coated on the outside. And I know that a lot of people like this. I quite like it myself. A lot of people hate it because they say that you can't see how much whiskey you've got left. And they have a point. It is very hard to see. If you shine a light through it, you can just about tell. And obviously you can feel the weight of the level. I'm about halfway down this one. But yeah, presentation on this one is going to be a little bit of a Marmite effect. Some people are going to love it, some people not so much. The specs on this one, we know that this whiskey is bottled at a full quality 50% ABV. It's distilled to that 50% ABV from 100% Scottish barley. We know that it is unchill filtered and colouring free because it says so in quite small but also contrasting standout colours there. There's actually quite a lot to read on this one, a little bit of a wall of text. So I'll give you a little bit of a overview. Got the Bruichladdich logo there. I believe that's Adam Hannett's signature. And a lot of information, including the B Corp logo there, because they are, I believe they may have been one of the first distilleries to actually get B Corp status. And not only is this stuff made with 100% Scottish barley, it's also distilled, matured and bottled on Islay. So it's right up there with the likes of Kilchoman as the most authentic and craft produced of Islay whiskies. Something that I always like on a bottle of whiskey, which we have on this one, is a bottle code somewhere on here, and it's down here. It's not that easy to find. It's in quite small dark lettering on the base. You have got a bottle code there, which is 2 digits, a forward slash and 3 digits. And I believe it would make sense that the first 2 digits are the year of bottling, because on my bottle here we've got a bottle code of 23208. And if you actually put that bottle code into the Bruichladdich website on the page for Classic Laddie, it will give you not everything that we would want, but just about everything that you could want to tell you how this whiskey is made and what casks go into your bottle. So it's very much like what Ardnamurchan and Adelphi are doing with their whiskies, but I think Bruichladdich have actually been doing it longer than Ardnamurchan. The only problem with this is that Bruichladdich kind of got involved in the dispute between Compass Box and the SWA when Compass Box got in trouble because the SWA said that they were basically giving away too much information about what they're doing, that they were being too open and too transparent because they were giving the source and the year of distillation as well as bottling for each cask. So what Compass Box were giving us, and between you and me still are, was the age and source of every component. And long story short, I've been through this before and you probably know all about it. The SWA decided that shouldn't be allowed. But at least from that bottle code, we do know the casks that go into this, and we know that the youngest spirit in this bottle was distilled around 2016, so around 7 years old. So if this whiskey was going to have an age statement, that age statement obviously has to be the youngest spirit, so it would be a 7-year-old. Some casks that go into this may have been older, possibly much, much older, and we'll get to that in a second. Cask types that go into this one, we know from the batch code on the website exactly what they are though, and it is a very large and varied vatting. There's 85 casks gone into my batch of Bruichladdich Classic Laddie here, from 5 different vintages, 6 different barley types, 11 different cask types, including bourbon, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot wine, Muscat, some sherry casks, some hogsheads, some European oak, mostly first fill, but with 11 second fill casks in there. So they're mostly fresh casks. Out of those 85 casks, only 11 of them had been used previously. And the reason why we know all of this is because Bruichladdich believe that telling the customer what they're buying is a good thing. Sadly, as I mentioned, the SWA decided that full transparency should be illegal under the pretense that being able to tell the customer the age of casks in the vatting other than the youngest cask is open to abuse. As I said, the laws that we currently have say that you're only allowed to put an age statement on the bottle of the youngest whisky in the vatting, and obviously that law was never intended to stop people giving information about the product. It wasn't intended to stop people from giving all the information. It was to stop people from just putting the age of the oldest components, which is fair enough. And the SWA would probably say that their decision to stop Bruichladdich and Compass Box and other distilleries from giving the age of each individual cask is to stop the current regulations being open to that kind of abuse, the way that we see happen in some rums, where a lot of rums, they are actually allowed to state the age statement of the oldest casks, even if it's an infinitesimally small amount. And then some might say that the ruling from the SWA was to target one particular company or a couple of companies that the SWA doesn't like. But that would be pure speculation. The result, though, is that there are no limits on how open and honest a distillery is allowed to be before they're breaking the law. Facts are that the SWA thinks that it's better for us to know that there is some 7-year-old whisky in this bottle and some casks that may be older than for us to actually know how old those casks are. So the SWA prefers us to guess that this might have some, say, 30-year-old casks in here than for us to actually know the truth. So in accordance with SWA regulations, I'm going to give you full spec on the age of this whisky. So we know that Bruichladdich opened in 1881. So as far as the SWA are concerned, what they want us to know about this whisky is that the whisky in this bottle is between 7 and 142 years old. If you have any more accurate info on the age of the whisky in this bottle, please don't put it in the comments below, because I don't want you to get arrested. Am I conveying it clearly enough that I think that the SWA ruling on what we're allowed to say about whisky is very, very daft, and I really wish that we could go back to a time before that SWA decision where we could actually get all the information. Anyway, onto the actual whisky, however old it is, that's actually inside this bottle. Bruichladdich, like Ardbeg on Islay, they have had a fair amount of uncertainty in their recent history. They were actually closed until the year 2000, and a few years after the reopening of Bruichladdich, they opened an entry-level flagship 10-year-old single malt product. It's not this one here. It was called the Laddie 10, and it obviously had that 10-year-old age statement. It was bottled at 46% and it was matured in bourbon casks. It sold for £35 here in the UK, and it was more or less 10 years ago to this day that it disappeared from sale, and that's because it was replaced by this stuff. That Laddie 10 though, I bought a lot of bottles of that stuff. I thought it was very, very good, and when they replaced it with this, I'm not going to lie, I was disappointed. And because of that dip in quality as I perceived it, I actually stopped buying Bruichladdich for quite a while. Distilleries need to be careful when they're changing or discontinuing core range products. Fast forward about a decade though, and a lot of people are saying very positive things about this expression, including G Whisky making it his Whisky of the Year. So let's give it another go. Another thing that I was actually quite excited about when I was deciding to buy this bottle is that they talk a lot about how they use less glass and all of that good stuff, smaller carbon footprint, and they mention using a polypropylene cork stopper. So I was getting really excited that a Scottish distillery had finally stepped out of the 19th century and they were using a synthetic cork, and I didn't have to worry about TCA contamination and shrinking, leaking corks anymore. Mine's not synthetic, mine is composite natural cork. So I think what they're actually saying when they talk about using recycled polypropylene for the stopper, they're talking about the top bit, which I guess is good. I mean, a lot of companies just use wood for the top of the stopper, which is possibly as green and recyclable and renewable as polypropylene, because polypropylene comes from oil. I'm not sure about that one. But yeah, I am disappointed that we haven't yet got a large Scottish distillery using a synthetic cork. Any day now, surely. So we know that's a beautiful natural colour. That is the colour that whiskey should be. And more than that, we know that there's sherry and wine and all sorts gone into this, so it's actually darker than it would have been if they'd have just put it in refill hogsheads. So yeah, unless there's a good reason, a whiskey should not be darker than that. Bruichladdich Classic Laddie on the nose. Very, very barley driven, which is something that I always love. Lots of dry barley, gristy, vanilla maltiness, but also quite a bright maltiness as well, juicy and sugary and sharp. Lots of barley sugar, a little bit of a note of Braeburn apples. Also quite winey and grapey. You can definitely tell that they've used a very complex cask breakdown in this one, including lots of wine casks, which Bruichladdich are now very well known for. A little bit of a cognac note on the nose. Definitely a little bit of, I'm not saying it's like cognac, but there's some crossover between that De Rose Armagnac that I had a little while ago. Despite the grape influence, there's a strong maltiness though, and lots of grains, in particular like a cereally porridge and rice pudding nose on the nose, which actually really reminds me of when I did the tour at Bruichladdich, which was a fair few years ago now. If you're lucky enough to go to Islay, you really should go to Bruichladdich, especially if you're lucky enough to be there when they're actually mashing, to see their mash tun. Because the mash tun at Bruichladdich is a little bit special, because it's an original Victorian cast iron open top mash tun. It's actually the original one that they used to have at Bunnahabhain, and Bunnahabhain made the horrendous decision to sell this wonderful old antique open top mash tun because they wanted to upgrade their capacity. But yeah, if you can visit Bruichladdich and you do the tour while they're mashing, it's just a wonderful experience, the aroma coming through when they're adding the first waters into that mash tun. And the milky porridge and gristy note in this really reminds me of that experience. Quite a bit of vanilla, milk bottle sweets, quite a spirit-led whiskey, as well as an ever so slightly spirity whiskey, in that there's quite a bit of youthful spirit in the nose of this one. I think that the wine casks that they add into this one probably integrate into that youth quite well, which is probably half of the idea of it. You guys know that I have a fairly low opinion of wine casks in whiskey, and in my opinion they're quite often a little bit of a smoke and mirrors act to cover up any youth, and I think that they do a fairly good job of doing that in this one. But it has to be said that on the nose, as well as the palate that we'll come to see in a minute, it is a youthful whiskey. Nice maltiness though, and surprisingly straightforward for how convoluted the cask breakdown is. It's very much a spirity and gristy and barley led spirit. Quite a bit of oakiness on the nose as well, a little bit of dry oak in there. Let's see how it tastes. More dry barley notes on the palate, as well as a little bit of starchiness coming through, and that's something I always think of as being a youthful note, a little bit of a starchy, mealy youthfulness. But again, on the palate to match the nose, it's quite bright and malty, lots of sharp, crisp barley sugar notes, as well as quite a mineral, almost salinity, a mineral maltiness on the palate of this one. And I think it's quite possible that some of that minerality and some of the red fruits note that I'm getting on the palates are coming through from those wine casks. Because I'm also getting a little bit of a chalkiness on the palate of this one, a little bit of a chalky, bitter, medicinal pill note. Overall, though, the palate again is very malt driven. It's, to anyone that's familiar with all the Islay distilleries, Bruichladdich and their unpeated stuff is a really nice, welcome change of scenery. If you're the kind of person that really loves their Islay malts and spends a lot of time and money on the Islay whiskies, as I am, and I'm sure a lot of you are, then it's nice to go to Bruichladdich. People don't give it enough credit. It is actually very unique on Islay. Not only are they producing unpeated whiskey, the same as Bunnahabhain produce probably the majority of their whiskey unpeated, but the standard Bruichladdich and like the Islay barley and all of those, they're not only unpeated but they're unsherried as well. So it is a very raw and kind of back to basics, and despite the fact that there is a very complex cask breakdown in this, it is a very relatively unobscured style of single malt, and I like that. Very delicate and refined, and just honest whiskey that tastes like whiskey. This could have come off so much worse for having the amount of the long list of different cask types that go into this. I'm really pleased to say that it hasn't become too much of a model, and something that I keep thinking of again and again when I'm tasting this Bruichladdich Classic Laddie is that it kind of reminds me of like the Glenmorangie of Islay. I think Glenmorangie 10-year-old in particular, that has that kind of bourbon matured, straightforward, light and refined and delicate, just no nonsense, straightforward, bare bones whiskey flavour profile. This has that as well. So I think that anyone that really likes Glenmorangie 10, you'll probably love this because it's basically a slightly younger but improved version. That colour, beautiful, natural, love it. Despite the amount of wine casks and things and sherry that they put into this, there is a noticeable bourbon influence on this one, which I really like. It's something that I really liked about the Bruichladdich Classic 10 that we used to have. In fact, I think that Bruichladdich Laddie 10 was really one of the first whiskies that I had where I was just really stunned by how good just bourbon casks can be. I think that the Laddie 10 had more of that in it. I think that it had a little bit more fresh bourbon, and you could tell that it was a slightly older whiskey, had a little bit more depth. But those kind of lactic, creamy, honey, caramel, vanilla notes from that old bottling is something that really started my love of bourbon matured Scotch. And this has a fair amount of that too. Strong bourbon influence, a little bit of a hint of lactic, creamy custard as well. And I think towards the end of the palate, quite a bit of oakiness coming through, a little bit of planky oak, perhaps a little bit too much, a little bit of a plywood MDF note. Again, and I said I wouldn't do this, but comparing it to the Laddie 10, there does seem to be more raw, active oak in this. Let's have one more sip and look at the finish. Grassy, malty, oaky, long finish, excellent body and intensity, but quite simple with a pleasant bitter bite at the end. So all in all, I have avoided this whiskey for a lot of years. I had a couple of bottles, to be fair, 2 or 3 in the last 10 years of the classic Laddie, but when it was in the old bottle, the one that used more glass and had the rounded shoulder, and it just seemed a bit dumpier than this. It didn't have the embossed bits, you know the one. I had 2 or 3 bottles of that, and I was never that happy with it. But I do think that this has probably improved slightly on what we were getting from Bruichladdich, say 5 years ago. And I am pleased to say that I think this is a really good example of a standard whiskey. It's easy to enjoy, excellent style for unwinding with something unchallenging, or for a tumbler or home blending. It would make an excellent base for any blend. And as I said before, I think that if you're really into your Islay whiskey, this is a great one to have perhaps every few years, just to give yourself a little bit of a change of pace. I don't think that this classic Laddie is going to wow anyone. It's not going to really blow anyone's mind. But it's well-made young whiskey with very few real flaws. It is young though. They say that this stuff is at least 7 years old, and I think that shows. I don't think that this exceeds its unofficial age statement at all. Thanks to the SWA, we've got no idea if the rest of the casks that go into this are 8 years old or 142 years old. All the SWA wants us to be allowed to know is that they are somewhere in between those ages. But with this whiskey, I would say that they are probably closer to 7. In fact, I'd say that the profile of this one, if you are youth averse, I would say that this stuff probably tastes younger than the majority of entry-level whiskies out there. But if you go into this, if you buy a bottle, get it at a good price, and you're aware of these things, then it's not necessarily an issue. So, value for money. The price of this stuff. I think it sells on the Bruichladdich website for £46. And I think I've seen it for a little more than that as well. I think I've seen it edging up to about the £50, £45, £50. And I'm not thrilled about paying £50 for a whiskey like this. I think 40 is about fine. I actually got this one on a very good special offer. I bought it a few months ago and I paid £30. And the good thing about Bruichladdich is you do get those offers very regularly. If you keep an eye out on certain large online retailers, you know where I mean, you will see this for £30, £35. And I think at that price, this stuff at 50% ABV and the quality that goes into this, it's a steal. To the point where I will be buying this again. Not regularly, but I would. And no, it's not as good as the old Laddie 10 that it replaced. It's just not. It's not as rich, it's not as balanced or characterful or mature. But that old bottling has gone. It's gone for all of us. And we all, myself included, need to stop dwelling on the past. It's not helping anything to keep banging on about how good whiskey was in the past. Because, in my opinion, yes, I do think that whiskey over the last 10 years, on average, has become more accessible and there's more choice. But I do think that quality has gone down a bit. But apart from go back in time and stock up so you're immune to these problems, what can we do? I'm definitely guilty about these rose-tinted nostalgia whiskey goggles. But we really need to concentrate on what we can get now, what's good, and embrace those bottles. If I could change one thing about this whiskey, I think it would be to simplify the cask breakdown. There are a lot of different cask types in this, and in my opinion, I don't think that they are particularly well integrated, and I also don't really think that they offer any identifiable flavours of their own. And this is just my opinion again, but I think that the complexity of the cask breakdown that goes into this is just a little too much. And like many of the recent Bruichladdich, I just wish that they'd dial it down a little bit and leave it in the casks a little bit longer. I think this is probably a reasonably common complaint aimed at Bruichladdich. Not everything needs a complex vatting, and not everything needs a wine cask. What I do love about this though, and you might have guessed it, is the intensity. I like that it's a straightforward whiskey. I love that they bottle it at 50% ABV. 46 is the gold standard of whiskey to ensure that those flavours are carried through. Bruichladdich have given us that and some spare. I think that providing you are aware that this is going to be a young dram and you get it at a good price, very few people will be left wanting with this. It is very well made young whiskey with a very, very good presentation. In a way, it's like a lot of the new distilleries around at the moment. We're getting something which is young, admittedly young, and they actually tell us that there is 7-year-old spirit gone into this. But it's good, and it's well presented, and it's well made. And that, for me, if you can get this stuff at a good price, means that it is recommended. Even if one day I do secretly hope that we'll see a return of that Laddie 10. Until then, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about this one, because I have had a love-hate relationship with it over the last few years. But I'm trying to come to terms with it. I'm trying to accept it for what it is and embrace the positives, because there are plenty. it does make you think. If it wasn't for that old bottling that I really preferred that it replaced, I would probably be a lot more positive about this, but that's not a way to live. Letting the good things in the past spoil your enjoyment of the now. Thanks for watching, and cheers.